Vince McMahon looked at Steve Austin and saw a good, steady, technical hand. Vince McMahon looked at The Rock and saw a glad-handing, all-smiles babyface. Vince McMahon knocked back Bret Hart versus Owen Hart at WrestleMania 10 because brothers don't fight. Vince McMahon thought the Royal Rumble was a stupid idea. Vince McMahon originally wanted to call WrestleMania the Colossal Tussle. Vince McMahon thought at various points that it was a good idea to promote fatalistic garbage men, magicians, race car drivers, evil dentists, Minotaur descendants, plumbers, demented monks, incestuous siblings, and evil hockey players. Now, if you think I'm dunking on him here, then no, I'm actually not. The man is an immeasurable success in spite of all of this because he's an incredible businessman. Opposing AEW's weekly TV show with a live revamped NXT is probably gonna be a masterstroke. In fact, the point I'm trying to make here is that the vast majority of wrestling's greatest ever decisions aren't made in the ring, but in the boardroom, as I shall now demonstrate. My name is Adam Cleary, and these are the 10 smartest decisions in wrestling history. Number 10, Vince McMahon defies his father. Sliding doors moment to end all sliding doors moments here, as Vince Sr. didn't even want his son to enter the pro wrestling racket. He wanted him to enter a more legitimate white-collar industry before eventually just giving up and hiring him as a ring announcer. In of itself, that's relatively unremarkable, but Vince's candid 1991 Sports Illustrated profile is fascinating. In it, he revealed that his father would never have allowed him to purchase the majority of the WWF had he known what he planned to do with it. You see, the son didn't merely expand his father's company, he changed its entire DNA by tearing up the local sports playbook and delving into superhero comics for inspiration. The WWF was gritty and working class in both presentation and top stars, but the WWF, in contrast, was far larger than the mundane real life and powered by the superhero writ large that was Hulk Hogan. Number 9, Vince McMahon buys up the competition. The old way of US pro wrestling, and indeed the current makeup of legitimate sport, is deeply weird. For a nation that is built on capitalist blood, the territorial system was oddly removed from the individualistic American dream. It feels like it needs a much more detailed explanation for another time, but the cliff notes are that it existed as a weird, quasi-socialist profit-sharing enterprise in which talents were cycled out and shared to sustain itself and its regional components. Basically, loads of competing businesses all worked in a way that was mutually beneficial. It all worked fairly well for everyone until Vince began purchasing the TV time slots of his regional competition with all of his New York money. He couldn't buy the other companies outright, so he undercut their crucial revenue stream. This was ruthless, and eventually every single promotion collapsed, allowing him to hoover up all the talent. Number 8, Eric Bischoff's anti-WWE onslaught. As the days roll on, it gets more and more tempting to draw comparisons between AEW and WCW. The Upstart League is funded by billionaire money, and the roster is, at the top, dominated by underused and reimagined WWE talent. But yeah, the press release that heralded the biggest non-WWE deal in US TV history was very much of a kind with Eric Bischoff's mentality. AEW offers fans less scripted soapy drama and more athleticism and real sports analytics, it said, in a direct shot at WWE's unpopular sports entertainment formula. This was, in essence, the entire approach that WCW came to dominate the early part of the Monday Night Wars with. WWF struggled to maximize its new generation of talent, where WCW repackaged and refreshed mainstream mainstays. WWF taped Raw, where WCW would broadcast Nitro live every week. WWF experimented dismally with sub-80s cartoon gimmicks, where WCW brought in the outsiders under their real names and added an intoxicating pseudo reality to the presentation. And where Vince was resistant to outside influences, Bischoff integrated concepts and talent from New Japan, AAA, and ECW to huge commercial success and critical acclaim. I mean, it did all implode on itself in the end, but that's another story for a very, very, very opposite list. Number 7, Shane Douglas throws down the NWA World Heavyweight title. The rise of ECW, when you actually think about it, was a stunning achievement. With no national TV outlet, stars who did not look like conventional stars, and a cast of freaks and outsiders, Paul Heyman created a cult. Then, when Shane Douglas threw down the NWA World Heavyweight title, he gave them an inciting incident all almost cinematic in its heft. In throwing away that loyalty to the NWA, ECW cultivated its own loyalty amongst its ardent taste-making hardcores. That fading 10 pounds of gold had retained just enough of its luster to mark this as a sacrilegious act, but it also wasn't worth a shit. It was trash, and when Douglas binned it off at the close of the NWA title tournament, ECW used the iconic visual to position itself as the renegade outlier of the industry. Number 6, The Caveat. In 1996, the Outsiders of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall debuted on WCW Nitro. The idea to make it look like the duo were still somehow contracted to the WWF was genius on a creative level, but a business headache. A lawsuit eventually ensued, and WCW were forced to settle it. But hidden within it was one term that perfectly underlines Vince McMahon's persistence, or Vince McMahon's delusion, or both. Were WCW to ever liquidate, the WWF only had to match any incoming offer to secure its assets. In the end, though, it didn't even come to that. After Time Warner executive Jamie Zellner cancelled Nitro and a prospective TV deal fell through, Vince used his overpowered hand to throw pennies a few feet away from the toes of AOL Time Warner, who had no choice but to scurry towards them. Number 5, defecting from the Japan Pro Wrestling Alliance. The JPWA was the first wrestling promotion native to the country. Spearheaded by the godfather of Puro himself, the emerging industry was so popular and so rousing that it's partially credited for healing the psyche of the nation post-World War II. But when Ricky Dozan was killed in a Yakuza attack, the promotion that drew eye-watering TV ratings, the biggest in wrestling history irrespective of country, found itself susceptible to infighting fueled by ego and money. Antonio Inoki, a man I have done an entire video on the genius of, left to eventually found New Japan Pro Wrestling. From the ashes of the JWA, both New Japan and All Japan each formed in 1972. Boasting two distinct pro wrestling philosophies, both Inoki and his counterpart Giant Baba became the second and third faces on Puro's Mount Rushmore years after their JWA program was nixed. Number 4, Vince screws Bret. A smart decision by design that manifested as accidental genius, Vince at Survivor Series 1997 betrayed Bret Hart for several reasons too detailed to delve into here. I mean, my god, there are only so many hours in a day. Above all else though, and in a total subversion of today's paradigm, McMahon recognized that Stone Cold Steve Austin was about to become the man. He was more than happy to remove the toxic political obstruction from his path. Think about it, WrestleMania 14 drew a colossal 730,000 buys. And even before the infamous Tyson and Austin segment, the 98 Royal Rumble, or the Stone Cold vs. Everybody Rumble as its mother calls it, drew 351,000. Austin was the future. Vince knew it, and in one brutal, awful capitalistic gesture, Vince eased his headache and made sexy bitch yacht money. As for Bret, well, we all know what happened there. Number 3, Vince McMahon floats WWE on the stock exchange. Basically, right, WWE essentially safeguarded its future and increased its ability to maximize profits by going public in 2000. That's the boring economics explanation. With a massively increased ability to raise capital, WWE then assembled the greatest roster in wrestling history without even needing to book half of it. The ludicrous reserves at their disposal allowed them to kill what was left of the competition. Basically, WWE has money to burn, and they've used that money to engulf almost any company that has had the audacity to exist. I mean, just fast forward to now. NXT UK, for example, runs at a loss purely to strangle the life out of what once was a flourishing British scene. Number 2, WWE building around John Cena. Okay, so John Cena indirectly is the biggest draw in WWE history. By all traditional metrics, though, he isn't. Hogan was, of course, the biggest draw of the modern era, and that crown was eventually taken from him by Steve Austin, who drew bigger business, albeit over a shorter run. Then The Rock in the year 2000 drew the most consecutive 5-figure houses and will likely forever hold the record for the most purchased pro wrestling pay-per-view ever. By comparison, John Cena is not in that class by all traditional metrics. But the smiling, mugging, injury-impervious Cena, in his role as the face of the PG WWE, unlocked an untapped resource of revenue. Cena basically rid WWE of the stigma of the Attitude Era and rehabilitated the company's image post-Benoit. He did this with his tireless and admirable charity efforts and charismatic PR charm offensive. WWE then shaped itself around Cena's slick, family-friendly image, beckoning in several major partners to its clutches. The deal with Mattel alone earned $160 million in 2010. Number 1, the WWE Network. Well, the exclamation point on it all, and even more so than getting into bed with authoritarian political regimes and their billions of dollars in oil money, was the WWE Network. That thing changed wrestling forever and means WWE can likely never ever fail. Turning their back on pay-per-view at the perfect time, WWE went all in on the streaming service, giving wrestling fans in a stroke a vault of the industry's past, present, and future that would probably have cost them millions to assemble themselves. Somehow, it's still priced the same as your local indie show's video-on-demand service. So there you have it, those are the 10 smartest decisions in wrestling history, and yes, most of them were made by Vince McMahon. Let us know what you made of them in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching. I have been the SMRT Adam Cleary, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.